That's a long conversation, but we'll do my best. Okay, let me start out by saying it wasn't just me. I was probably one of the more optimistic people out there that the Ukrainians would be able to hold out for a few months. Sense of nationality was weak, training was weak, corruption was high, equipment was poor, equipment was outdated. Everything that we thought we knew about Ukraine, they have overperformed, and good for them. On the Russian side, world's second largest military, capable of carrying out multi-military operations, not on American scale, but still on different continents simultaneously. And you can literally walk from Russia to Ukraine. The Russians conquered Ukraine for the first time 300-odd years ago. They never gave it up since, until 1991 when their system collapsed. The idea that this was going to be an easy fight, I didn't think was all that controversial, and in fact, at the time, it wasn't. And they were able to capture the Crimea without firing a single shot just 8 years ago, so that was kind of the baseline. Primarily responsible for that is the defense minister Xu, who has been a personal friend of Putin going back to his time in East Germany. He has probably siphoned off a quarter of the defense funds for him and his cronies specifically, and has created a culture of corruption that goes all the way down to the enlisted officers. So we now know it appears that most of the money that the Russians have thrown at the rearmament program was simply stolen. So they are now using equipment that dates back to the 60s. And they seem to be at the moment so incapable of even making artillery shells, which, mind you, this is an artillery force that's supposed to be the biggest in the world, that they're bringing in equipment from North Korea that in many cases is in excess of 40 years old. I don't know how familiar you are with physical chemistry when it comes to explosives, but that's really bad. An artillery shell is an explosive strapped to a second explosive. That's a propellant that you put in a tube under high pressure. And so old stuff just blows up in the barrel, and we're seeing a lot of that. So we are possibly seeing Russia revert to a... Now, oh my God, I have no idea. That's part of the problem here. You would think that if anything works, it would be the artillery and their nukes. Well, their artillery doesn't work anymore, or at least not how it used to. And we just have this massive Soviet arsenal that they're pulling out of mothballs that hasn't been maintained appropriately. And a lot of the nukes fall into that category too. The high-end nukes were supposed to be the Iskander, and we've now seen that the Russians have already used over 2/3 of what they had, and most of them missed. So it's become a black box when it comes to the high-tech stuff. What they're using, they don't have a lot of, and what they're using doesn't really work very well. So, yeah, the nukes are a question. Point, does this mean that the Russians can't win? No, the sheer number of forces the Russians are able to potentially mobilize are huge. But all of those problems, totally legitimate problems, have defined the Russian military going back to the beginning. They throw bodies at something until it breaks. Now, in half of their wars, that works, and in half of their wars, it does not work. I think it's too soon to say which one we're in right now. I think we've had a pretty good idea of how Val Putin thinks, going back all the way to the very beginning. I mean, this is a guy whose first action as prime minister was to triple down on the war in Chechnya. He believes that violence is a means to an end. He doesn't revel in violence for violence's sake. You know, this is not Stalin. He's also not as smart as Stalin, but the idea that the coherence of the Russian system is his first and only priority is something he has not wavered on from the beginning. Now, he will use tactics to achieve that. That, of course, put most of Russia's neighbors in huge danger. That is not unique to him. That has been part of the Russian government mindset going back to the czars and like the early czars. So when it comes to the specifics and the tactics, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. The problem from my point of view is the overarching strategy, because while he has not isolated himself to the Putin only has 6 people who have access to him anymore, and 3 of them, Medvedev and Chuiko, are utterly incompetent. That only leaves 3 people. Igor Suchin, who is the chairman of Rosneft, Energy and Influence, Patrushev, who is the ideologue, and sorry, I'm drawing a complete mind blank all of a sudden. Oh, the finance minister, that's it. So there's no one in the security services except for Patrushev indirectly who can have an open, honest conversation with him. He has become in many ways a little bit like Donald Trump in that he insists that his people lie to him. And so even if he is brilliant and even if he never makes a mistake, that would be the logical, responsible adult in the room thing to think. I don't have access to know if that's what he's going through. but you would expect if he comes to that conclusion that there would be a purge at the top, and at a minimum, a significant rearrangement of personnel. We've not seen that. I don't think de-escalation is in the cards anytime soon. The Russian periphery is very difficult to defend unless it's a forward defense, and so from the Russian point of view, it's not just that they need Ukraine and all of Ukrainians' needs. They need the next band of countries beyond it. And the only thing that would be worse in a situation of demographic collapse that the Russians are dealing with than not launching this war would be to launch it and fail. So they've launched it. It's not going great. They're going to double, triple, and quadruple down until they have nothing left. Russia historically fights until it cannot fight any longer. It has never backed down from a war without at least 500,000 battlefield deaths, and at most, we're looking at 70,000. You know, I have not been a fan of I've got to say that on this topic, I think Biden has hit it about right. You rally the allies as much as possible. You put delicate but unending pressure on the country that matters the most, Germany, to embarrass it until it, at a minimum, exceeds. And the Germans are exceeding. You would like them to become more involved, but I think Biden is old enough that he has a good enough reading on German history that you don't want to push them too far, because that is a different problem. And you bit by bit increase the flow, increase the training, and whatever absorptive capacity the Ukrainian forces have, you fill it as soon as you can. And I think that's what but it looks different. The whole idea of globalization was that security and economics were in a bit of a package. All we're seeing right now with the Biden administration is the security aspect. All the trade sanctions from Trump are not just still in place, they've been doubled down on, they've been institutionalized. With the exception of the dispute between the EU and the US on Airbus, all of those trade disputes are still there too. So I just realized that I don't even have my name on. You're not talking here about a globalized world, you're talking about a unipolar security arrangement where the United States holds almost all of the cards and makes all of the decisions and goes its own way on economic issues. If, in many ways for the rest of the world, that is potentially even worse than an America that is simply checked out, well, of course the Commission is doing what the Commission does and negotiating it, but they're not getting any traction whatsoever. And there has not been a huge amount of political capital spent by any of the capitals of the member states to do it at all. The two countries that matter the most, of course, and that would be Berlin and Paris. Paris is functionally comfortable with a degree of economic nationalism because that's their standard operating procedure. And the Germans may have taken a different position, but remember, this government only started in January, and the war started in February, so they've been a little bit occupied. The country that we would normally turn to if our goal was to de-escalate the trade tensions would have been the UK, but with Brexit, that's gone. Yeah, that just leaves the Dutch, and the Dutch don't have the leverage that is necessary to force the rest of the EU to pick up a topic, much less run with it.